Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. Yes, back live after a couple weeks of repeats. I am back with a live show, so it's very good to be with you. You can probably tell that this is a new episode because my hair is now 2 weeks longer than it was last time you saw me. Because I started growing it out in the summer and I've just been letting it grow, but I should probably get a haircut really soon, and I'll get to that in a moment why. There's a special reason why I should probably, in relatively short order, ditch this little social experiment of growing my hair out. Basically it's been just kind of over the summer I was like, I'll grow it out kind of longish one last time. Because, I said that the last time I had long hair, and I ended up growing it out one last time. So, so last couple weeks have been repeats. I was still able to get in to do the other political program that I do with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper, my favorite Republican, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, but wasn't able to get in to do this show. Just been a lot going on, been very, very busy. We do the show live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. For those of you who watch the show live, you already know that. I know a lot of you watch it later at ipmnation.com/MCUTV, where we archive all the episodes because some of you are at work or at school and whatnot. Actually, when I look at the numbers, as far as people who watch the show online at IPM Nation, typically there's more people logging on to the website at night and watching the show on demand than are watching it live. But if you do happen to be watching it live, I appreciate it very much that you spend this time with me. Well, I appreciate it regardless, but if you are watching live, we do have an active chat room at ipmnation.com/MCUTV. You can also communicate with me during the show via Twitter, at IPM Nation. There's also the Facebook page for Matt Connarton Unleashed. Please like the page if you haven't done so already. And actually, you can communicate with me via any of those methods at any time, not just during the show. If you have something you want to say or something you want to express or opine about having to do with the show at any point, you can do so, and then we'll address it during the show. So we are back with a new episode this week, and probably we'll get the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed fired up and back on track next week. That, of course, runs Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on DKRN.FM. That has also been on a bit of a hiatus. Just been a lot going on, and had to kind of step away from this show for a couple weeks. But here I am back for the attack. I don't know if I missed anything. I don't know if anything really went on politically, I'm kidding. Of course, we had the midterms, which I'm actually very eager to talk about, as you can imagine. Before we get to that, I have kind of we'll call it a pre-announcement announcement. And if you're confused, don't worry, I am too to some degree. I don't know how I got talked into this. I'm actually kind of excited about it. Here's what's going on. I'm going to be a little bit vague and cryptic. I'm not going to give you all the details until I'm prepared to make the official announcement. So this is kind of a prelude, a teaser, if you will, for the announcement that will be forthcoming in the coming weeks. But I'm going to tell you a little bit now, because if I say the little bit now that is definite, then I can't really go back on it once I've said it publicly, because I don't want to. You ever have something like that where you have something you've decided to do, but there's a little part of you that isn't sure about it, or you're nervous about it, or so you kind of, you do something to make sure that you don't have an out. So you don't, by not giving yourself an out, you have to follow through on whatever it is that you said you're going to do. That's kind of how I'm approaching this. Okay, so here's what I'm going to tell you now today. I have decided, I've been talked into, this just happened within the last couple of weeks. Actually, it was exactly 2 weeks ago that I was. It was after it was after Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades 2 Wednesdays ago. I had dinner with someone who's I'll leave his name out of it for now, but I was we revisited a subject that we've discussed before. And I was talked into and agreed to run for office. So I, for the first time in my life, and I'm saying it here, so now I can't go back on it because I'm like that. Once it's out there, I have to do it. I don't want to be one of those people who talks about doing things and then never does them. So I'm telling you now, I am going to run for office next year. Now, 2015, of course, it's an odd-numbered election. It's an odd-numbered year, so that limits what I can run for. But there are things. I mean, every year there are some things that are up for election. Again, I'm going to be vague here. I'm not going to tell you what office I'm running for. I'm not even 100% sure on that myself at this point, so I have an excuse to not tell you that. But I have committed to running for office in 2015. I will also tell you that I have committed, and this is where things get a little tricky for me. I have committed to run as a member of a specific party. Now, unless you're new to the show, you know I'm an independent because I have plenty of issues with both parties. I was a Democrat up until the mid-2000s, and then I became an independent. There were things about the Democratic Party that really were starting to get to me. But I don't foresee feeling at home in the Republican Party either. Nor do I see myself becoming a libertarian, although I agree with libertarians on a great many things. I'm just not a party guy. I don't go to parties. And I don't want to be a member of a party. But here's the thing. Independents don't win, and I'm interested in seeing if I can actually win. So here's what's gonna happen. Now, hear me out. Don't judge me. Hear me out. Okay. And I'm not saying which party yet. Yes, I have already made that commitment as far as which party I'm going to attach myself to. Notice I didn't say join. Which party I'm going to attach myself to in an official capacity. I will reveal that eventually, but not yet. That will be revealed at the time that I make my official announcement. I've had to kind of think about, and am still somewhat contemplating, how do I want to approach this? Because in terms of running for office, there are, a few options in terms of, okay, do I take it really seriously and actually try to win? Do I take it not so seriously and just run and whatever happens, happens? Do I take it not seriously at all and try to turn it into a giant publicity stunt or a performance art thing? Kind of like Vermin Supreme. Some folks here in New Hampshire probably know that name. I watched him once throw glitter on Randall Terry at an event. It was quite the sight. Anyway, and by the way, that last option does appeal to me quite a bit. But I have not made a final decision. I think what I'm going to do is this. Because it'd be fun to do the whole publicity stunt performance art thing. But I also have always thought, and it's funny how life works. I don't know if anyone else experiences, well, I'm sure some of you do, but I'm sure we all have it at some point, but it seems to happen to me a lot. There seems to be a consistent pattern in my life where this happens. I will think about something casually thinking, it would be fun to do this. It would be interesting to do this, but not really be serious about it. And then like 5 or 6 years later, an opportunity presents itself for that to actually happen for real, even though it's something that when I initially thought about it, I wasn't even serious about it. Kind of sounds like law of attraction type stuff, but I don't know if that counts because when I initially think about it, I'm not serious about it. I'm just kind of thinking about it, but then it comes true anyway. There's been quite a few examples of that in my life. It's very, very strange. I should be careful about what I sort of casually think about. For as long as I can remember, thought wouldn't it be interesting to maybe someday run for office, but just be completely honest and upfront 100% about absolutely everything in terms of what I believe and just see what happens and see if maybe, is it possible that in American politics you can be completely upfront about all of your positions unflinchingly and people will see past the partisanship and all of that and all the slickness and actually appreciate your honesty. But more on that in a moment. We have a call. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's this?
Hey, Matt, it's Don. How you doing?
Good, Don. How are you?
Please tell me, tell me you're not going to turn Republican.
I am not making... All right, Don. Because you took the time to call, I wasn't... All right, no, I'm not going to... I am not going to register as a Republican.
Okay, cool. Because I usually agree with 94% of what you say, and that'd be pretty disturbing. I thought maybe Gary got to you or something.
No. No. Now this does not, though, for the record, this does not necessarily mean I'll be registering as a Democrat either. Because notice I said I'll be attaching myself to a party.
Okay.
But there are other parties, so I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea and think I've decided to go Democrat necessarily either.
No, I know you wouldn't do that. You just scared me, though. It's like, okay, he's independent now. It's like, not libertarian, so I was trying to figure it out. But
no, Don, I won't be joining the party of Marco Rubio. Oh, excuse me, I'm very thirsty.
Good. All right, buddy. I won't bug you no more. I'll listen to what you have to say.
Oh, anytime, Don. Thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
All right, bye.
All right, bye. All right, Don is a loyal viewer. I didn't want to. He took the time to call. So thank you for the call, Don. So, all right, we've narrowed it down. No, I will not be registering as a Republican. But again, that doesn't mean I'll be registering as a Democrat either. There's also, you've got the Green Party. There are the Libertarians, whom I do agree with on a great many things, although not everything. There are, what else? What else is there? Maybe I'm intentionally not mentioning in my list of possibilities the specific party that I have committed to running with, or running for, or whatever it may be. But what I've always thought would be interesting would be to see if I could, or if someone could just be so completely honest about absolutely everything that voters would appreciate that instead of buying into whatever partisan phoniness someone tries to sell you. For example, let's say hypothetically that I were to run as a Republican, which I'm not, but if I were to run as a Republican, how is the game played in a case like that if I'm not really a Republican? I would have to emphasize the issues where I do agree with Republicans, and I do have some conservative viewpoints, and I would have to downplay the ones where I disagree. That's how you do it. You still, the Republicans they'll tag you as a rhino regardless if you step out of line on anything, but that's how the game is played. On the other hand, hypothetically, if I were to run as a Democrat, again, it would be a matter of emphasizing the issues where I agree with Democrats and trying to kind of downplay and de-emphasize the issues where I disagree. So I think it would be an interesting social experiment to register for whichever party I'm going to register for, and then not try to play the game of emphasizing this and downplaying this and what, but just putting it right out there, being completely honest. And just see what happens and how people react. And I'll probably lose. I have no delusions about my electability, but you never know. I say that, but then I look at some of the people who do hold office in this country, and I think, well, why not me? So I kind of go back and forth on that in my mind. A lot of people think I'm electable. It's kind of a weird thing where, typically in my life, the things that I've done, goals that I've set, things I've tried to accomplish, there's usually, we all deal with naysayers, people who will try to tell you, oh, you can't do that. That'll never work. You're going to fail at that. And the trick is to believe in yourself. Even when it seems like nobody else believes in you, believe in yourself. But with this, because the possibility of me running for office, this has been an ongoing conversation amongst myself and certain people for a long time. Everyone else seems to think I can win, and I'm the one who's like, I really don't think I'm electable. Hence the my mention about the haircut earlier. I'm going to have to ditch this social experiment and go back to short hair. But that's all right. It's looking pretty shaggy. Plus, I've already gotten past that threshold. You know, I mentioned that when I first started growing it out long, it seemed like a lot of the women I know were like, "Oh, hey, I like you with the longer hair. It looks really good on you." It's been a few weeks now since I've gotten a compliment from a female on my long hair. Yes, in that particular regard, I really am that shallow and am basing my hair decisions based on whether or not women like my hair. So yeah, I should probably just cut it anyway. So what's going to happen is I think I'm going to just be who I am. I will attach myself to a particular party, but I'll just be who I am. I'm not going to try to BS anybody. I'm not going to try to emphasize one thing and downplay another. I'll just, and that will confuse people. But being an independent, I confuse people anyway. I mean, I'm one of the only people I know who, well, in this particular instance, the only person who's had this very specific thing happen. I had, within a 24-hour period, I had a liberal call me a Republican apologist, and I had a Republican call me an Obama Kool-Aid drinker, all within the span of a day. Obviously, those are two things that you would think are diametrically opposed, but, depending on what issue we're talking about, I confuse people. So, I confuse people on issues like abortion. I consider myself to be solidly pro-choice. I believe in a woman's right to choose. And while I don't agree with abortion necessarily in that I don't think women should, have abortion on demand, and take that too lightly and whatnot. I also don't believe in legislating it. I think it would be disastrous. But if I'm talking to a pro-choicer, and again, I consider myself pro-choice, but if I'm talking to someone who's pro-choice and I say, well, I am pro-choice, but I am in favor of some regulation. For example, I support parental notification. That person who is pro-choice looks at me like, well, then you're not really pro-choice. If you support any regulation at all, you're not pro-choice. If I'm talking to a pro-lifer and I say, well, I'm pro-choice, but I'm in favor of some regulation or whatever, then, well, they'll just tell me I'm pro-abortion, because a lot of pro-lifers consider those of us who are pro-choice as being pro-abortion, a term that drives me nuts. Of course, I'm not pro-abortion. I don't know anyone who is pro-abortion. But, so unless you take a hard left or hard right position on something, you confuse people. So I'm actually kind of liking the idea of confusing people, and I will be able to confuse people just by being me and telling people what I really think. So that is my pre-announcement announcement, and I got a little long-winded with it. So you can only imagine how long the actual announcement will be. But I will have more details soon. But I am running for office in 2015. That much I know. Well, I know more than that, but that's all I'm telling you. And I won't tell you which party, but we now know, as I have revealed to Don, it will not be Republican. Glean from that what you will. But I will always be an independent. I mean, there's members of parties who really are independents. I mean, my God, here in New Hampshire, I mean, a lot of these Republicans are really libertarians, but they attach themselves to the Republican Party. What else? Before we get to the main thing, because I do want to talk about the midterm elections, talked about my hair, talked about my future, my hair. God, you should have seen me. I used to have hair like halfway down my back. I used to have really long hair. We'll get to the midterm elections. Here are my thoughts. Maybe it's better that I wasn't available to do the show right after Election Day. We did do some midterm election talk, of course, on rock, paper, hand grenades that evening. But for me to express my own thoughts, maybe it's better to have had a week to really kind of digest everything. And I do want to share some conclusions with you about the midterm elections nationally. I think, first of all, not a big surprise. Historically, what we saw play out is what happens typically when you have a two-term president during the midterm elections of that second term. The folks in the voting booth will tend to punish whichever party is opposite that of the president. We saw it with George W. Bush. It was a thumping, he said, the day after Election Day that year. My God, that was 2006. Where does the time go? I remember that so vividly. It was a thumping, he said, and then he accepted the resignation of Donald Rumsfeld. That was his big concession. That whole thing got weird too. Like when he said that he already knew that Rumsfeld was going before the election, but he didn't want Rumsfeld leaving to influence the election. So Bush essentially lied and said, no, nothing's changing, even though something was changing. And he admitted that he lied, and we were all just supposed to accept that. And that whole thing got very weird. Anyway, one notable exception historically in recent times, of course, is during the Clinton administration. There was a big upheaval during the midterms of his first term, but in his second term, the voters actually punished the Republicans, and it was a Democratic wave. They decided to punish the Republicans for the, for the Clinton impeachment. A lot of folks weren't too pleased with the Republican Party for going ahead and impeaching the president. But typically, in the second term, there is a thumping, as George W. Bush said. So it was no surprise to see a Republican wave. What may have been a little bit of a surprise was the size of the wave. Nationally, it was a pretty big night for Republicans. But when, again, Obama's in his second term, so you have that. We hear that phrase, Clinton fatigue, even though it ended up not mattering during his second term. But I haven't really heard the buzzword Obama fatigue. But, people get pretty discouraged with a two-term president. Maybe presidents should only be allowed to serve one term, because this always seems to happen. Once they get into lame duck status, they're not effective anyway. But so it was a big Republican wave. Now, here in New Hampshire, and again, I know people watch us online from around the country, this program, because we do focus on national politics, but I can tell you that here in New Hampshire, of course, we kind of bucked the trend. That was bucked with a B. The trend of the rest of the country. Here it was more of a Democratic wave in terms of national office. Gene Shaheen won re-election, defeating Scott Brown, for example. However, the New Hampshire State Legislature, there was certainly a Republican wave, but in terms of the national ticket, Frank Ginta, however, did defeat Carol Shea Porter here, so they've traded that seat back and forth. So he'll be going back to Congress. So not a huge surprise, but a pretty big win for Republicans. And again, when you've got a two-term president with a less than a 40% approval rating, that will happen. And I think the economy may have played a factor. I wanted to, last week we had Greg Moore from Americans for Prosperity on rock, paper, hand grenades. And I wanted to ask him this question and just never quite got to it. When Gary and I have Greg on, it's always a fast-paced conversation. And so, we never quite get to everything that we want to discuss. But, if you look at the economy, very mixed bag in terms of the performance of the economy under Obama. There are two ways to look at it. Now, if you want to see the glass is half full, you can say, well, unemployment is down at its lowest point since 2008, since Obama took office. Actually, if you were to go strictly by the unemployment number, the economy has improved dramatically under Obama. Now, I'm not making that argument that the economy has improved dramatically under Obama. I'm just saying if you were to go specifically by that indicator, which it seems like most people I think that was kind of the general accepted barometer amongst people, well, people like me, frankly, who, I'm not an economist. I'm not even good at math. I failed college accounting the first time I took it. Had to take it again. So, so for people like me who don't really understand with any sort of depth these matters, the unemployment rate used to be a pretty good barometer. Also, too, deficit. The Republican Party doesn't like to admit this, but this is fact. This is fact. The deficit has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking under Obama. Federal spending has been going down, not up. Republicans, look, I have plenty of my own criticisms of Obama. Okay, again, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, so I'm not carrying anybody's water. I'll criticize Obama all day long for stuff I don't like, but when I think he's taking heat for things that are either not actually his fault or are simply absolutely not true, then I will defend him. And I've got to defend him on the deficit. They try to make it sound like we have runaway deficits under Obama because he's a tax and spend liberal and deficit spending has gotten way out of control. And that is absolutely 100% false. And, I'm sorry, some people don't want to hear that, but, look at some charts and graphs. That's how I learn this stuff because, again, I'm not an economist and I get in over my head with that stuff pretty quick, but it is demonstrably provable. The deficits have been shrinking, not growing. Okay, so if you look at things like that, foreclosures are down. The housing market seems to have rebounded. There's other things too. There's other factors. You can look at the glass as half full and say, the economy's actually gotten a lot better under Obama. Or you can look at it as half empty. And I think much more people see the glass as half empty than they do half full. And I think this played a role on Election Day. If you look at the glass as half empty, you say, and this is what I wanted to ask Greg Moore, is it time that we stop using the unemployment rate in this country as any sort of barometer for how the economy is doing or how the workforce is doing? Is it time that we ditch that entirely and focus on the labor participation rate? Because the reality is this, the unemployment rate has plummeted. Great. But the labor participation rate is abysmal. And I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. But, the unemployment rate does not figure in people who have dropped out of the workforce because they've given up looking for work. Look, you're not counted. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, and if anyone knows for sure, call me. Because I get in over my head on this stuff. I freely admit that. I am no economic expert. But if I'm not mistaken, you are not counted in that number, the unemployment rate, unless you are actively collecting unemployment. If you're not actually, so when they tell you, when you hear numbers like the number of unemployment claims, this is another number that is often used as a barometer. They'll say, for the month of October, the number of new jobless claims fell to whatever number it fell to. And it has been falling because the unemployment rate's been falling. Well, okay, so that many fewer people applied for unemployment. So that affects the unemployment rate. But what about all the people who were collecting unemployment who've used up their benefits and now they're not collecting? And now they're struggling and a lot of people. And this is something that, many of you watching have probably experienced this because this, and if not, you certainly know someone who is experiencing this because this is widespread. People who are underemployment is very pervasive in this economy. People who lost their full-time job and all they've been able to find is a part-time job. Or maybe they found a full-time job, but they had to take a job in something other than the field that they were trained or educated in, and they're making a lot less money. And now they're part of the working poor. The unemployment rate doesn't count these people. And that's a lot of people. A lot of people are now underemployed. So, when you take all that into consideration, it's very easy to see the glass is half full with the economy. In other words, yeah, the economy is in recovery, and it's been in recovery for several years now. But it's a lousy recovery. This is the worst economic recovery we've seen in my lifetime. We've had recessions worse. I know that it's become a common thing to refer to the Great Recession, the recession that we just went through, as the worst recession since the Great Depression, and that's why we call it the Great Recession. But interestingly enough, if you were to discard all other economic data and again just focus on the unemployment rate as your barometer for how the economy does, then you would actually have to consider the worst recession since the Great Depression, the recession that we went to in the early 80s, at the end of Carter, at the beginning of Reagan, when unemployment got up over 12%. 12%. We hit 10.5, I think, in this last one. We were at over 12% unemployment in the recession of the early 80s. So by that barometer, that was the worst recession. But then we had a great, robust recovery. Where's our robust recovery? We are in recovery, technically, but it's a crappy one. So I think that really hurt Obama, and I think it bolstered the Republicans. Now, how does Obamacare factor into this? And this is where it gets interesting. Here in New Hampshire, now Frank Ginta, once again, was able to defeat Carol Shea Porter. They've traded that seat back and forth a couple times. So Republican Frank Ginta goes back to Congress. Republican Frank Ginta, when asked about Obamacare, when asked about the Affordable Care Act, had been doing something. And I think that helped him here in New Hampshire. I think that's why he was able to, in terms of the national ticket, in terms of who goes back to Congress, he was able to kind of buck the national trend and be a Republican, ride the national wave, but buck the New Hampshire trend in terms of who we send back to D.C. I'm confusing myself now. You know what I mean. I have a smart audience. Even if I get confused, you still know what I mean. Anyway, he was a Republican who New Hampshire is sending back to Congress, who was able to win. When talking about Obamacare, when talking about the Affordable Care Act, he did something that I have been saying for what seems like years now, Republicans must immediately start doing. And for, however long it's been, when I first started saying this, I said at that time, Republicans must start doing this immediately. Republicans must stop with the repeal and replace nonsense when it comes to Obamacare. Mitch McConnell said it recently. Root and branch, he said, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. It amazes me that there are Republicans who are still saying this. But we've seen a movement, finally, more and more, and it started to happen with this past election, and now I think they're all going to start moving in this way. Leaving behind repeal and replace and moving toward reform. Reforming Obamacare. Taking the existing parts of the law that they don't like and reforming them. And I think that's great. That is a pragmatic way to do it. Repeal and replace was becoming a joke, and it was actually doing them, I think, the Republican Party a great deal of harm. John Boehner's House tried to, what did they vote on repeal? Something like 50 times, knowing it was going to fail. It was just this grand symbolic gesture, because that's what we want our elected officials doing, right? That's why we send them to Washington and pay them with our tax dollars for these grand symbolic gestures. Just ridiculous. And there was something, do I have it here? I don't know. Oh, maybe I don't have it. There was something that, is it Joni or Jody Ernst? She was a Republican who won in this election. I don't even remember what state she's from, somewhere out west. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. But she made a comment about, there's going to be a lot more people signing up under the Affordable Care Act this coming January. I mean, we're up over 8 million so far, right? It's actually probably even more than that. That was the last solid number I heard. How are you going to tell these people Well, now that you've signed up for this, now that you have insurance, some of you perhaps for the first time in your lives, now we, the Republicans, are going to get in and snatch it away from you. It's crazy. Repeal and replace, it sounds ridiculous. And those of you Republicans watching, when you talk about repeal and replace, no one believes you. No one thinks you're serious. Mitt Romney during the 2012 election cycle, he used to say, if you elect me to be president on day one, I used to laugh out loud at this, on day one, I will repeal and replace Obamacare. Well, no, you won't. How? How would he have done that? How would he have repealed it? First of all, with an executive order? Oh, presidents can't sign executive orders. That's then you get sued by Congress, or that's a separate issue. God, craziness. But and replace it with what? That's the part that really gets people skeptical. You're not going to replace it with anything. You don't have anything. Oh, you're going to replace it with what? What are you going to replace it with? And then you hear crickets. Paul Ryan was supposedly working on something at one point. I don't know whatever happened to that. We did have, now this isn't true of all Republicans. I should be careful about speaking in these generalities. We did have Jim Rubens on this show. He was challenging for the nomination. He would have been a much better candidate than Scott Brown. I think Jim Rubens would have ultimately been a much better general election candidate to go up against Jeanne Shaheen than Scott Brown was, the carpetbagger. But anyway, Jim Rubens was too moderate to win the nomination, which is kind of funny since Scott Brown, who everyone tagged as a liberal, ended up winning the nomination instead. But he had a plan. He actually had a plan. But generally, they don't have a plan. So I like hearing them talk about reforming Obamacare, because my feelings about Obamacare from the beginning were, look, on the one hand, yes, we need healthcare reform, and I absolutely believe that every American should have access to affordable and adequate, preferably better than adequate healthcare. You're never going to convince me that in the most innovative, most prosperous country in the history of the world, that we can't make sure that everyone has access to affordable and adequate healthcare. You're never going to convince me of that, okay? Everyone should have it. Everyone should have access to it. Okay, so I believed that we absolutely needed healthcare reform, but I thought the Obamacare approach was the wrong way to do it. An area where I tend to be a bit more conservative is I hate government bureaucracy. I hate it. So you don't take an already overly bureaucratized system, the healthcare system, and then add additional layers of bureaucracy to it and get the government more involved and entrenched in it. I thought that was the wrong way to do it. I would have preferred to see, again, healthcare reform absolutely necessary, but I would have preferred to see a more free market-based, and hopefully with some transparency, a more free market-based version of healthcare reform, which would look more like the Republican version of healthcare reform. But of course, we would never get an actual Republican version of healthcare reform, because the only time generally at the national level, the only time Republicans are interested in discussing healthcare reform is when they're fighting against something like Obamacare. Unless they have something to fight against in terms of healthcare reform, they don't want to hear about it, they don't want to think about it, they don't want to know about it. No, there's no problem. We don't have to fix anything. So, I kind of got, so how does this fit in with the general election? Well, I think that here's an example of, I think it got misused a bit. I'll tell you how. So let's use as, I'm sorry. So anyway, so Frank Ginta was talking about reform, which I think is a smart way to go. And more Republicans are now too. But there are Democrats in this Republican wave that they were fighting against who really blew it. And I'll give you a specific example. Allison Lundergan Grimes, who was challenging Mitch McConnell in Kentucky for his Senate seat, she was very awkwardly distancing herself from Obama and from healthcare reform. And there's a problem with how she went about this for two reasons. Now, but first, let's look at why she did it. Well, that's how the game is played. We see this with the midterms. When you have a two-term president, you will see members in that second term, the second set of midterms, you will see members of that president's own party actively, assuming he has bad poll ratings, which always happens, two-term president, second term, usually has bad approval ratings, because everybody's sick of him by that point, you will see members of that party distancing themselves from the president. So we saw Democrats all over the country actively distancing themselves from Obama. George W. Bush during his second term. We saw Republicans all over the country during the midterms actively distancing themselves from Bush. We saw that with Bush 41, George H.W. Bush. We saw the same thing happen. Well, actually with him, I'm sorry, he wasn't a two-term president, but during his first term during the midterms, because his approval rating was tanking, he got to experience that. He got to experience some of the second term blues during his first term. So we saw Republicans actively distancing themselves from him. The thing is, though, does it do more harm than good? I think it may do more harm than good in some instances. And Allison Lundergan Grimes is a great example. Very strong candidate. I think at one point she did have a shot at unseating Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. But here's what she did. She not only, in distancing herself from Obama, I think she made two big mistakes. Number one, she made it particularly awkward by, and this got national attention, when asked in an interview if she voted for Obama in 2008, because all these Democrats are running around going, oh, we don't march in lockstep with the president. Oh, we voted with him 97% of the time. Well, that doesn't mean anything. We don't march in lockstep with him. No, we're our own people. Forget Obama. He's not coming to campaign for me, so just forget about him, right? So they all play that game. That's how the game is played. But when she was asked if she voted for Obama, I'm sorry, not in 2008, in 2012, did she vote for Obama? She wouldn't answer the question. And she would say things like, well, my vote's, that's a private matter. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for. That's none of your business. Well, come on. Obviously, you voted for Obama. He's a Democrat. You're a Democrat. So when she denies that she even voted for Obama, she's taking that whole distancing herself from the president thing to an absurd extreme. And it's almost insulting. I bet a lot of people in Kentucky who might have liked her felt a little bit insulted by that. Like, do you think we're stupid? It's so obvious and transparent what you're doing. You're trying to distance yourself from Obama and you're being ridiculous about it. Just admit that you voted for him. You can still say you don't march in lockstep with him. You aren't on board with the Obama agenda. Say whatever you want. But to be like, well, I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, that's just stupid. Be honest. Just tell us you voted for him because we know you voted for him. You didn't vote for Romney. Spin it if you have to. Admit you voted for Obama, but then spin it as, well, I don't agree with the president on everything, but I still saw him certainly preferable to Mitt Romney. But don't just lie to us and say, oh, well, not lie, but very awkwardly evade the question. I mean, her evading the question, I mean, it was the way she did it, it was almost as awkward as a Marco Rubio water gulp. And that's awkward, right? So that's one mistake I think she really made that hurt her. And the other was distancing herself from Obamacare. Now, Obamacare is unpopular in some places, popular in others. Let's be honest. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, so I don't have to be, I don't have to take one side or the other and say, oh, Obamacare is a failure, or oh, Obamacare is a rousing success. You got to split the difference state by state if you're really being honest about it. I would say that here in New Hampshire, where we do the show, it hasn't gone well. I don't currently have health insurance, and I know other people who don't as well, because even with the Affordable Care Act, it's and then there's, the Republicans don't want to expand Medicaid, and they're always fighting that and whatnot. There's a myriad of factors, but I'm just saying here in New Hampshire hasn't exactly been a rousing success, although some have benefited from it. But in other states, it has been very successful and very popular. You know what one of those states is? Kentucky, the home state of Allison Lundergan Grimes. But she's so into this thing of distancing herself from Obama that, she couldn't attach herself to, in Kentucky, they call it Connect. That is the name. And I think it's KYNECT, the KY obviously for Kentucky. I don't know what the rest of it stands for. It's an acronym for something. I assume the C is care. The A is probably affordable. I don't know. But that's what it's called, Connect. Very popular in Kentucky. Very popular. It's been very successful there. Polls show Kentuckians love Connect. They love their state healthcare exchange that was set up under the Affordable Care Act. They love it. But she's running away from it because she's trying to get the hell away from Obama to the point that it is insulting to the intelligence of Kentucky voters. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell, when he's asked about how successful Connect has been in interviews, I saw clips online of him very awkwardly trying to sort of get around that and say, well, we're going to repeal this. And, well, what about Connect, Senator? It's very popular. Well, we can still have that. We're just going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And it's like, but Connect is part of the Affordable Care Act. Anyway, so she made two critical mistakes, in my view, and in the view of others. There's Susan Milligan wrote this article for, what website was this from? I lost the site. I think it was from Talking Points Memo. Susan Milligan wrote this a couple days after the election, but it's relevant. Did Democratic Senate candidates get skewered on election day, or did they get gored? Democratic candidates were running hard for election or re-election, and many of them were running just as hard against President Barack Obama. The standard line is that the president is unpopular, so the safest thing for Democrats to do is to distance themselves from him as much as they can. This is the same strategy then presidential candidate Al Gore used in 2000 when he declared himself my own man and separated himself from former President Bill Clinton. Gore, of course, lost, and very narrowly, a win in Florida's contested race. Most of you, those of you who are old enough, I'm sure, remember vividly the 2000 election and what a nail biter that was, and it dragged on for days. But that was very awkward too. The way Gore, here you've got Vice President Gore, President Bill Clinton, this president who, one of the best campaigners, one of the best politicians overall, Slick Willie, that we'd ever seen. Fantastic campaigner. Gore wants nothing to do with him on the campaign trail. Gore would even make comments about, again, it was so awkward, about restoring honor and dignity to the Oval Office, which obviously was a veiled sort of, I don't know if attack is the right word, but sort of a veiled jab at Clinton over the Monica Lewinsky thing. Very, very, very awkward. I'm not going to read this entire article because we don't have time. There's some good information here, but Susan Milligan, if you want to just Google Democrats dumb dodge. That's the name of the article if you want to read it. But she makes the point that that Democrats actually did themselves much more harm than good by so awkwardly distancing themselves from Obama. Look, everyone sees through that stuff. You'd have to be a fool not to see through it. So why do it? Why do it if if it's obvious to everybody what it is that you're doing? And let's see. Before we run out of time, because I never get to everything, while we're on the subject of Kentucky, we're going to keep talking about Kentucky to finish up the show, because who else is from Kentucky? My favorite person in the political world to talk about, according to Time Magazine. He was on the cover of Time Magazine a couple of weeks ago as the most, what was the title of the article? The most interesting man in politics. I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but Rand Paul, also from Kentucky. And Rand Paul has a big problem. By the way, for those of you who are new to the show, if there's anyone watching for the first time, quick disclaimer, I issue this often. I am not a Rand Paul supporter per se. I am not endorsing Rand Paul for president. I get excited about him because I think he's very interesting. And it will be very interesting to see how he tries to thread the needle that he, as someone who really is essentially a libertarian in the Republican Party, how he manages to get to the Republican nomination, which I do think is possible. And, of course, it is my dream match, my political dream match, to see for the 2016 presidency, Republican nominee Rand Paul versus Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, because then you will see an anti-war, sort of neo-isolationist Republican versus a Democrat who, when it comes to foreign policy, as far as I can tell, is a neoconservative. So that very much a flip-flop of roles there in terms of foreign policy, and I think that dynamic would be fascinating to watch. So that's what I'm praying for. I want Rand Paul versus Hillary in 2016. Not because I necessarily like either of them. I can honestly say, in terms of both of them, there are things about each of them that I do like, and also things about each of them that I dislike, that I have grave concerns about. But I want to see that match. The political junkie in me wants to see that. And Rand Paul is fascinating to me. Rand Paul has a problem, though. He may not be able to run for president unless he gives up his Senate seat. Because, according to the law in Kentucky, you cannot, and I think this is probably true in a number of states, Kentucky is one of them, you cannot run for two political offices at once. Rand Paul will also be up for re-election in Kentucky for the Senate in 2016. It would be nice for him if he can do both, if he can run for president and rerun for Senate at the same time. So even if he loses the presidency, he'll still have his Senate seat. He's not going to be able to do that under the current law. This almost changed. This had a chance of changing in this past election, and it didn't. Let me read this very, very quickly because we're almost out of time. This is from NPR.org. Rand Paul's Kentucky problem. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul may have to choose between keeping his Senate seat and running for the presidency. This is actually the AP reported this. Everyone knows Senator Mitch McConnell had a great election night in Kentucky last week. As for the state's other Republican Senator, Rand Paul, that's a different matter. That's because while McConnell was cruising to a big re-election win on his way to becoming Senate Majority Leader, things did not go so well for Paul. He was hoping Republicans, who already control the Kentucky Senate, would also take over the State House. In other words, a wave in the State House of Kentucky, which, would have been, given the what was going on nationally, that would not have been a surprise. I mean, it would have been similar to what happened here locally in New Hampshire. A result that would grease the path for a state law allowing him to run for both re-election and the presidency at the same time. But that failed to happen. And the Democrats, who are still in charge of the State House, are disinclined to pass a law to help Paul. Kentucky's Democratic House Speaker Greg Stumbo refused to take up the two ballot spots at once bill earlier this year because it was designed for a single person in violation of Kentucky's Constitution. He told NPR, quote, "There's only one guy who's talking about holding on to his Senate seat and also running for a United States president," unquote. Part of what the law says is, this is the exact wording from the statute, no candidate's name shall appear on any voting machine or absentee ballot more than once. Rand Paul can't run for both. Kentucky law prohibits a candidate from running for two different offices at once. Republican Senator Rand Paul is running for re-election and is also exploring a bid for president. There's more to this article if you'd like to see this. The author is Andrew Nellis, Nellis. Rand Paul's Kentucky Problem is the title. Just Google that. You can also find it on npr.org or on the AP website. We're out of time. But so Rand Paul might either have to make a big decision about giving up his Senate seat, or maybe he just doesn't run for president after all. But I'm really hoping he runs because I want to see that. We had more to get to, but we're out of time. As always, I ramble. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Back live this week. And, of course, tonight's show will be up and available on demand at ipmnation.com/MCUTV. So even if you did see it live, if you'd like to relive all the glory, you can. I don't know. And I promise to have more soon on my future bid for public office. And by the way, yes, I am well aware that there is a certain someone out there who I'm sure will publish terrible things about me online and half-truths and exaggerations and awful things about me, as happened to a good friend of mine. But whatever, I don't have a wife and children for that individual to try to publicly humiliate. So yeah, bring it. I don't care. I know very, very few of you might even realize what I'm talking about, but for those of you who do, yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm sure it's coming. I know it's coming. All right, so that does it for this week's Matt Connarton Unleashed Television Edition. And please don't forget about the radio edition, Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on DKRN.FM. This week's radio edition will be a repeat, but we'll be back with new episodes of that next week, as well as another new episode of this show. And I'll be back later with Gary on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. That's it for now. Bye, everybody. I'll talk at you a little bit later.